Hello students, this is Unit 4.3, Drugs. Alright, so there are lots of types of drugs, okay? So for this unit, we are going to be focusing primarily, entirely, on psychoactive drugs, okay? Now, what are psychoactive drugs? Psychoactive drugs are chemical substances that alters perceptions and mood. So how we perceive our environment, how we perceive reality, our conscious awareness, if you will, is altered by these drugs. All right, these chemical substances are typically agonists or antagonists, which affect the synaptic gap, right here, between neural connections. Okay, so keep in mind that all the drugs that we're going to be talking about directly affect neural communication in the synaptic gap. All right, so the three main categories of drugs that we will discuss this unit are depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. So it's really important to know how each category of drug affects neural communication, once again, in the synaptic gap. Synaptic gap. Now, before we explore the electrochemical and biological functions of these different drugs and their effects on our mental processes and behaviors, let's first discuss the concepts of dependence and addiction. Dependence and addiction, whether they be physical or psychological, can oftentimes lead to tolerance and withdrawal. Tolerance is the diminishing effect with regular use of the same dose of a drug, requiring the user to take a larger and larger doses before experiencing the drug's effect. So like if you take, let's say person A, let's say Bill, the first time Bill uses cocaine, it's going to give him the best high that he'll ever have with cocaine. Because as he continues to take cocaine, his body and his neural connections become tolerant of it, and so they require more cocaine to get that high effect. Okay, that is tolerance. Oftentimes when people become tolerant or they try to quit a particular drug, it can lead to withdrawal. Withdrawal is the discomfort and distress that follow discontinuing the use of an addictive drug. All right, so if you stop using heroin, for example, you're going to have withdrawal symptoms of night sweats, shaking, you're going to be very hungry all the time, you'll go into convulsions. All right, so that shows a physical dependence. So in the previous slide, I mentioned physical and psychological dependence and addiction. All right, so let's elaborate more on those concepts for a minute. Physical dependence is a physiological need for a drug. Like you use so much of a drug, like that drug replaces your natural neurotransmitters. All right, so it's marked by unpleasant withdrawal symptoms when the drug is discontinued. Once you become physically dependent, you have to have the drug to function normally in society because that drug has replaced the natural chemicals in your body, the neurotransmitters. This is different than psychological dependence. Psychological dependence is a psychological need to use the drug, such as the relief that you might feel of negative emotions. So, for example, if I'm feeling really stressed out, and what is more common with alcohol abuse, some people feel like alcohol relieves stress. That's not necessarily true physically, but psychologically they might believe it's true, and so this might lead to a psychological dependence. Of course, if they stop using alcohol, there will be no physical withdrawal symptoms, but they might experience psychological symptoms, which we'll talk about further in class. Now let's get into the categories of drugs. We will begin with depressants. Depressants do not make us depressed. Okay, that is not what the category means. Depressants refers to how neural communication is slowed down or depressed. So these drugs slow down neural communication, or they slow down the rate at which neurotransmitters cross the synapse. Okay, so alcohol is probably the best example of the depressant. Alcohol affects areas of the brain involving memory formation, decision-making, and impulse control. So if you think about what we just discussed in defining depressants here and apply it to alcohol in the first bullet here, that's why when people are drunk, their memory is impaired. They don't have as good of memory. When they're drunk, they make bad decisions because the frontal lobe, where a moral compass is located, it can't process information as quickly. And so they make bad decisions when drunk. And when people are drunk, they begin to be much more self-disclosing. They reveal a lot of information about themselves because it's hard for them to control their impulses. They're very impulsive because, again, they can't process information very quickly because neural communication has been depressed. Other depressants are barbiturates, also known as tranquilizers. So just like a tranquilizer implies, it's a drug that depresses the activity of the central nervous system or slows down the activity of the central nervous system, which is reducing anxiety but impairing memory and judgment. It includes Neputol, Seconal, and Amytal. Again, you don't have to know these specific drugs. Just know barbiturates or tranquilizers and what they do. And then another depressant is opiates. Opium and all of its derivatives, such as morphine and heroin. That's right, heroin and morphine come from opium. They're made from opium. They depress neural activity, temporarily lessening pain. It dulls pain, and it also lessens and dulls anxiety. With enough artificial opiates, the brain stops producing its own opiates, which means opium or heroin or morphine can lead to a very severe physical dependence. All right, this leads us to the next category of drugs, which are stimulants. Stimulants just are the opposite of depressants. Stimulants are drugs that excite neural activity and speed up body functions, whereas depressants slow down neural activity and body functions. So what do you think the most common stimulant is? It's in fact, it's caffeine. So the sugar and coffee and sodas and candy, that's the most common stimulant there is, caffeine. Now, for the rest of the slides, you're going to notice there's several paintings and portraits of a guy named Brian Lewis Saunders. What this guy did is he took a lot of different kind of drugs, and then he painted self-portraits of himself while on those drugs. So here you're going to see Brian Lewis Saunders, how his conscious perception of himself while under the influence of these different drugs. Other stimulants include amphetamines and methamphetamine, also known as speed. These two drugs have the exact same effect on neural communication in that they excite the release of dopamine. Now, this can cause your natural dopamine neurotransmitters from being released, and it can cause them to atrophy and die. And this can lead to physical dependency on these two stimulants. Now, the major differences is that amphetamines actually have a medical purpose. They're actually prescribed by doctors even to this day. So they do have a medical purpose, whereas methamphetamine is more of the street drug, which is made out of really harmful chemicals. So it can have really sometimes unpredictable negative side effects. Okay? Things they have in common is that they increased body functions and they increase energy and mood changes, and so it makes the user really, really energetic. They can't sit still. They got to keep moving, got to keep moving, got to keep going, can't sit still, got to keep going. But the other thing is it also decreases fatigue and it decreases appetite. So you're not hungry, you're not eating, you're not taking any calories, you're not taking in energy, but you're burning your energy. So you're going to start dwindling away, as you'll see in later pictures. Now, but first, as we said, amphetamines have medical use. Methamphetamines do not. Let's look at methamphetamine ingredients. Pause the video and look at the ingredients. We'll talk about it in class tomorrow. Don't let me forget. So this is after 2.5 years of methamphetamine use. Here's the before and obviously the after picture. Here's another one. And another. That's about 6 years of use. As you can see, users get thinner, they look malnourished, they look like they've just finished running an ultra marathon or something and aged about 4 years. And yeah, this one's pretty bad. The reason is they can't sit still. If they don't have anything to do at home, or if they don't have anything to distract them or keep them busy, then they're going to do something, i.e. rip their hair out or do something because they can't sit still. Their neurological communication, the release of their neurotransmitters will not allow them to sit still. So they have to keep moving. They have to be doing something. So this is the physical and behavioral side effect to that. And oh my, this is probably the worst example of all. All right, if you get this joke, tell me in class and I'll give you a brain. Cocaine is another well-known stimulant. It is classified as a TRI, or a triple reuptake inhibitor. It is a serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, to be exact. So you have to be familiar with these neurotransmitters, guys. And if you don't remember what reuptake is, remind me in class and we'll talk about it. You have to know it, okay? So, because it blocks the reuptake of serotonin, it affects mood, it affects our focus, and because it blocks the reuptake of the neurotransmitter norepinephrine, which is essentially adrenaline, the user is constantly energetic. They have to be moving, they have to be doing something, they're constantly amped up, they're ready to go, they're ready for anything. And then it affects dopamine, so they're constantly fluid body movements, right? So you can see here that the self-portrait, he's constantly going over the lines, the same lines, because he's constantly frantically moving, and he has a really hard time keeping focus as he's doing some math equations, and then for some reason there's a guy on a jet ski. I have no idea what's going on. Ecstasy, or MDMA, is the last stimulant we're going to talk about. It's a synthetic stimulant, which means it's man-made, and it's a mild hallucinogen. And we're going to talk about hallucinogens next. It produces a sense of euphoria and social intimacy. It's built with short-term health risks and long-term harm to serotonin-producing neurons and to mood and cognition. It can cause dehydration because it gives you a sense of euphoria, which makes you move. It sometimes causes people to want to dance and things like that. And so sometimes what a big problem is, people take this drug and they go to raves to dance and they get dehydrated and don't realize it because they're having fun, and they end up unfortunately dying of dehydration, which is a real serious problem. All right. So there are short-term health risks. There are long-term health risks with this. It is a serotonin mimicker, so it's an agonist. So it can eventually deplete your natural serotonin-producing neurons, and as a result, you become physically dependent upon ecstasy. So it's a pretty dangerous drug. Stay away from it. You should stay away from all these. So let's recap. Ecstasy, amphetamine, methamphetamine, cocaine, the major stimulants to know. Next up, hallucinogens. So the first category of drugs we talked about was depressants, which slows down neurocommunication. Then we discussed stimulants, which speeds up neurocommunication. And then we have now hallucinogens. Hallucinogens have a completely different effect than the previous two drugs because it affects an area of the brain known as the locus coeruleus, also known as the LC. And a single neuron from the LC can branch to many different parts of the brain. So for a really powerful hallucinogen like LSD, one of the most powerful hallucinogens we know about, also known as acid for its street name, it stands for lysergic acidic dithylamide. And because one neuron from the LC can branch to all different parts of the brain, it can activate the sensory cortexes of the cerebral cortex. And so LSD, for example, has very complex sensory effects. So that's why on LSD, people can smell colors, or they can hear a tree coming up behind them. Okay, it has really, really bizarre sensory effects, and we'll go into more detail in class. The last hallucinogen and the last drug we'll talk about is marijuana. All right, the main ingredient in marijuana is THC. It stands for delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. All right, marijuana mimics natural cannabinoids, which excites the flow of dopamine into the synapse. Now, this dopamine is going to affect the limbic system around the hippocampus and also around the hypothalamus. So, because it affects the hypothalamus, it gives the user a sense of hunger, often known as the munchies. So this is why they're constantly hungry, because it's constantly stimulating the hypothalamus. Also, it shuts down the hippocampus, so memory is also negatively affected by marijuana. It also can affect the cerebellum, which gives the user a sense of slowed muscle coordinations and slowed movements. So those are some of the symptoms of marijuana use. So it's very dangerous for probably driving, of course. It's probably dangerous for other reasons. It leads to weight gain because, again, it negatively affects the hypothalamus. And so here are some other effects of cannabis. It leads to reddening of the eyes, decreased intraocular pressure, which can lead to damage to the eye and long-term eye defect, which is really bad because if you don't want to lose anything, trust me, it's your eyesight. It also leads to dryness of the mouth, which can lead to loss of taste buds. It can lead to eroding gum line, which can lead to tooth decay. Skin, we lose sensation of heat and coolness because it dulls the sensory cortex of the parietal lobe. It increases the heart rates because it is a smoke after all. And then muscle relaxation, it can lead to muscle atrophying and muscle decline. All right, well, that sums it all up. See you guys in class.